One day, the empath will no longer smile softly to soothe the narcissist's rage, no longer try to reason their way into saving a soul that only pretends to be wounded in order to keep control. They have cried, forgiven, and believed that love could redeem darkness until they realize that not everyone longs for the light. The narcissist does not want to be healed. They want to be worshipped. They do not crave truth. They crave an audience for their illusion. And when the empath finally understands this, when they stop trying to fix what was born to manipulate something sacred awakens within them, the wrath of the soul. It is not the impulsive anger of a wounded ego, but the deep voice of a soul that has been silenced for too long. In that moment, every emotion, once suppressed sorrow, humiliation, fear of being disregarded, unites into a single current of raw, radiant, and fierce energy. This wrath does not destroy, it purifies. It does not come to avenge, but to burn away the illusions the narcissist built, the false promises, the reversed guilt games, the crocodile tears of pretend remorse. For the first time, the empath no longer sees that person through the eyes of compassion, but through the eyes of awareness. And in that very moment, the entire structure of power that the narcissist built upon their guilt collapses. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That is exactly what the empath does on the day their sacred fire rises. When they dare to look into their own shadow, the anger they were once taught was evil, they discover that it is in fact their brightest light. For within every empath lives a warrior who has endured too much, an observer who has absorbed the world's pain and turned it into compassion. But compassion cannot survive forever without boundaries. And when those boundaries are forged in the fire of awareness, they do more than protect the soul, they illuminate and burn through the darkness of the manipulator. The narcissist never fears losing you. They fear losing control over you. That is why, when the empath stops explaining, stops reacting, stops trying to prove their goodness, the game ends. For the first time, the narcissist must face themselves without the mirror that once fueled their illusion. And in the stillness of the empath's gaze, they see what they have always run from, the emptiness within. They feel their power dissolve, like smoke vanishing into the vacuum of truth. The empath realizes that forgiveness is not about reopening the door for the wicked to return. It is about releasing a burden that was never theirs to carry. They no longer try to heal anyone because they understand that true healing never comes from control but from freedom. And that freedom begins the moment they dare to be angry, the moment they allow themselves to feel the fire they once feared and let it burn away the emotional chains that kept them imprisoned in the role of the good one. That fire does not consume the empath, it liberates them. After the flames, they are no longer the same. They no longer tremble at being misunderstood, no longer bow before gaslighting, no longer react to covert attacks. They look straight at the narcissist and realize, "You no longer have the power to define me." And in that instant, the narcissist experiences true collapse, not because they were abandoned, but because they have just lost the only mirror that ever made them feel real. The sacred wrath of the empath is not meant to destroy others. It ends the alliance with darkness. It is the moment they stop playing the role of the healer and step into the role of the awakened. And when they emerge from that fire, there are no more tears, no more apologies, only light, silent, clear, untouchable. Part 1 before the fire rises. The empath's silence and the narcissist's game. Before the sacred fire rises, before the empath dares to look straight into the darkness and say enough, they pass through a long season of silence. A silence not born of peace, but of fear. In those years, they believe that if they love enough, endure long enough, the narcissist will change. They believe kindness can redeem darkness, that understanding can soothe wounds the other refuses to face. But to the narcissist, love is never a meeting of souls, it is a game of power. In the beginning, the narcissist arrives like a warm breeze, perceptive, admiring, making the empath feel deeply seen and valued. Yet behind that attention lies not love, but calculated observation. They want to know what you need, what you fear, what you long for, so they can use those very things as chains. To the empath, being understood feels like a gift. To the narcissist, understanding you is a tool of control. And when the mask of charm begins to slip, the game begins. The empath starts to feel something strange. Compliments turn into subtle insults, promises of affection into cold silence. They find themselves accused of things they never did, manipulated through looks, through silence, through guilt. The more they try to fix things, the worse it becomes. Because every act of sincerity feeds the narcissist's starving ego. The narcissist lives on emotional reaction. They need you confused, hurting, and reactive to feel powerful. In Jungian psychology, this is the stage of projection the narcissist's shadow cast upon the empath. Everything they despise in themselves, their weakness, their fear of abandonment, their shame, they throw onto you. They turn you into the mirror of their shadow, then begin to punish that mirror. And you, the empath, cannot understand why words of love have turned into deception, cruelty, and disdain. You don't realize that you've touched their primal wound, the fear of worthlessness. And instead of healing it, they try to destroy the light that exposed it. Why does the empath stay? Because they see potential, the wounded child, the fragile humanity hiding behind cruelty. They believe that if they love long enough, the other will awaken. But what they don't know is this. The narcissist does not seek healing, they seek submission. Your kindness doesn't soften them, it makes them despise you. Your forgiveness doesn't earn gratitude, it convinces them they can sin without consequence. And so begins the cycle. Harm, false apology, promises betrayal again. During this time, the empath slowly loses the boundary between me and them. Every time they cry, they are called weak. Every time they resist, they're accused of being dramatic. Bit by bit, the empath withdraws, doubts their own feelings, and starts to believe the fault lies within. This is the state of spiritual anesthesia, the soul's numbness. On the surface, they still smile, but inside, part of their spirit has gone silent. And yet, that silence does not die. It gathers. Each time they are dismissed, a spark ignites within. Each time they are gaslit into doubting themselves, that fire grows. It is not hatred. It is dormant wisdom. Until one day, without another insult or another tear, the soul awakens. That is the first moment of sacred rage, the holy fire they have long suppressed, not to avenge, but to save themselves. This anger does not explode outward like a storm. It spreads inward like flame. Steady, clear, indestructible. It is the voice of the soul saying, "Enough, love cannot exist where there is no truth." And in that moment, the balance of power begins to shift. For the narcissist, this marks the beginning of collapse. Because they no longer stand before a forgiving, easily guided soul, they now face one who sees them clearly. And once the empath sees, they can never again be manipulated. Nothing terrifies a narcissist more than that. The sacred rage of the empath doesn't roar. It begins with a gaze that no longer fears, a gaze that shakes illusions, that makes the narcissist feel for the first time truly seen, not with admiration, but with awareness. And in that gaze, their illusion of power begins to burn, like a paper castle meeting the flame of truth. Once that first inner flame is lit, a strange stillness envelops the empath. No more tears, no more nights asking, "What did I do wrong?" Only a cold, luminous clarity, as if the fog has been torn away. This is what Carl Jung called illumination through darkness. The empath begins to see every mechanism, every tactic, every fragment of manipulation that they once excused as misunderstanding. They realize the narcissist's cruelty was never accidental. It was the survival strategy of an ego terrified of light. The narcissist is not strong, as they once appeared. Every threat, every cold silence, smear, and victim act now reveals its true frequency. Not power, but fear. Fear of being seen naked in truth. The empath realizes that the narcissist's existence depends on controlling others' perception. When you believe them, they have power. When you doubt yourself, they have supply. But when you see through the game, they have nothing left to hold on to. What they fear most is not hatred. It is being seen for real by a soul no longer enchanted. In that moment, the empath understands that their silence is no longer surrender, it is the judgment of light. They no longer need to shout, to prove, to gather evidence. In the narcissist's world, truth is always distorted, but in the awakened empath's world, truth shines on its own. Every lie the narcissist tells becomes transparent under that light. Every act of manipulation exposes the trembling fear within them. And this is how their illusion of power crumbles not with a bang, but with the slow disintegration of a lie. For the first time, the empath no longer feels responsible to save. They sit in the stillness of awareness and realize that compassion does not mean becoming a sacrifice. They understand that their sacred rage is a boundary born of consciousness, a fire that burns falseness, not people. Here, their soul begins to reshape itself. No longer trembling at indifference, no longer reacting to insults, no longer moved by others' emotions, they become transparent light. Any lie that comes near them catches fire. In Jungian psychology, this is individuation, the process of separating from the fog of collective unconsciousness to return to one's true self. The empath who once mirrored others' shadows now becomes light with boundaries, no longer allowing others to project without permission. They begin to see that the shadow they carried, the chaos, the anger, the fatigue, was never something evil to hide, but raw energy demanding integration. And when they integrate it, something miraculous happens. The energy once used for endurance becomes the power of presence. They no longer get drawn into drama, no longer need to prove their worth through sacrifice. They realize true compassion is not doing everything to make others happy, but respecting their path, even if that path leads to self-destruction. The empath stops trying to save the narcissist, because they now understand no one can save a soul still in love with its own darkness. From this point, the relationship enters a new phase, silent, tense, yet strangely peaceful. The empath watches as the narcissist begins to panic when control no longer works. The flood of messages, the desperate lies, the mixture of remorse and threats, all attempts to pull them back into the old script. But now, the empath has learned the most important truth. You cannot be both the light and the source of fuel for darkness. Part 2. When the empath's sacred fire burns away illusion. The narcissist's frenzied reaction and the irreversible awakening. When the empath withdraws their energy, no reactions, no arguments, no tears, no explanations, the narcissist begins to feel something they cannot bear: invisibility. For ordinary people, silence is a space for calm reflection. But for the narcissist, silence is a void that threatens their very existence. Their entire sense of self is built upon other people's reactions. Every look, every word, every tear from the empath has been the fuel feeding their false self. When that supply disappears, their system begins to tremble. At first, the narcissist doesn't believe your silence is real. They interpret it as a tactic, another power game meant to manipulate them. So their first reaction is provocation. They will do anything to make you respond. Vague messages, sarcastic comments, cryptic social media posts, or nostalgic reminders of the good times, those moments that once made you believe we had something real. They use these memories as sparks, testing whether your heart still reacts the way it used to. When that fails, they switch to the victim role. Suddenly, the once arrogant, cold person becomes fragile. I don't understand why you hate me so much. Oza, you said you'd never leave me. I know I messed up. I just need to hear your voice. But the empath has lived through too many cycles to believe in these rehearsed apologies. They can feel the energy behind the words, not remorse, but panic. The narcissist is not apologizing for hurting you. They're desperately trying to regain control over your emotions. When pleas fail, they escalate to the trigger strategy. This is the most dangerous stage, because the narcissist knows your emotional buttons, your compassion, your guilt, your fear of being misunderstood. They might fabricate stories to draw a reaction. I had an accident, but don't worry, I didn't want to bother you. Or, no one understands me like you do. I really need you. Sometimes they'll use mutual friends to send messages, provoke jealousy, or post pictures with a new supply just to see if you'll shatter. The empath, if not fully awakened yet, may feel their chest tighten. They are torn between anger and pity, between awareness and memory. This is the narcissist's strongest weapon, emotional memory activation. They know how to pull you back into the emotional frequency where you once loved, once hurt, once hoped. A simple "I miss you" can flood you with memories like waves, but this time your soul is different. You see the mechanism beneath it. You no longer take the bait. When the narcissist realizes all emotional tactics have failed, they enter the third phase, hostility. They begin to smear you, spreading lies to friends, colleagues, even your family. They create a new narrative where you are the cruel one, the crazy one, the betrayer, while they are the poor victim. Their psyche is now in a state of extreme ego defense. They must destroy your image in others' eyes to preserve their illusion. The problem isn't me. A lie. In their mind, the story must be rewritten because truth is something they simply cannot survive. Meanwhile, the empath, now standing in awareness, does not retaliate. Not because they are weak, but because they understand that the narcissist is burning in the very fire they lit. Every lie, every smear, only exposes them further. The empath now sees everything from a higher plane. They no longer see an enemy, but a soul trapped in darkness, fighting not others but their own truth. But the narcissist isn't done. When people start seeing through them, they enter the final phase, the silent collapse. It begins with bursts of anger, then exhaustion, then a void they cannot fill. They lose control of their emotions, their sleep, their sense of excitement. All the things that once made them feel powerful fade away because all that power came from controlling others. Now that the empath is beyond reach, their ego center disintegrates. They fall into an identity crisis, no longer knowing who they are or why everything around them is slipping away. For the empath, this is the time of sacred stillness. No more battles, no desire to win. They simply observe and understand that this collapse is not punishment. It is the natural consequence of light meeting darkness. Carl Jung called this the confrontation of opposites, the meeting of two forces within the human psyche. Here, the empath is no longer identified with either side. They become the witness, calm, awake, centered. And in that still point, they grasp a profound truth. The narcissist was never defeated by them, they were merely exposed. And nothing is more devastating than being forced to see oneself when there's no one left to blame. In that light, the empath walks away without looking back. No need to prove, no need for revenge, because they know. Once truth is seen, it burns every lie on its own. Part 4. Rebirth in the Ashes. When the empath walks out of the narcissist's hell, after the storm has passed, what remains is not victory, but a profound emptiness. The empath steps out of that battle no longer who they were, yet not fully who they will become. They stand in a wasteland, no more screaming from the narcissist, no more familiar emotional chaos, only an unfamiliar stillness that forces them to face themselves. And this is the hardest stage, the stage of rebirth. In the beginning, the empath often falls into a spiritual void. After years of playing the roles of the healer, the one who understands, the one who endures, they now have no one to save, no one to mirror. The quiet becomes uncomfortable, almost painful, because the mind is not yet used to not being pulled into someone else. Yet it is precisely within this emptiness that the soul begins to reorder itself. It learns to exist without external reflection. On a deeper psychological level, this is the stage where the empath retrieves the soul fragments once claimed by the narcissist. Every manipulation, every act of gaslighting, every time they shrank to keep the peace, all of it took a piece of their life force. Now they begin to take those pieces back. Buried memories rise. The times they were humiliated yet smiled, the times they knew they were betrayed yet stayed silent, the times they apologized though they weren't wrong. And this time, they do not run. They sit with the pain and regard it as a teacher, not an enemy. Carl Jung once said, One cannot become light without first walking through one's own hell. The empath learns this in the harshest way. They walked through the narcissist's hell to meet their own shadow, the path that fears conflict, abandonment, and not being enough. In that darkness, they see clearly that the unconditional kindness they once prized was, in truth, fear in disguise. They loved excessively because they were afraid of losing love. They forgave not out of nobility, but out of fear of being alone. This realization is not comfortable, but it is freeing. When the empath accepts that they too have a shadow, they are no longer controlled by it. They learn to set boundaries without guilt. They no longer give as a reflex, but choose to give consciously. When someone tries to trigger their pity, they no longer melt. Instead, they observe and ask, is this truth or manipulation? They realize that true compassion does not come from carrying another's pain, but from respecting their path even when that path leads into darkness. And then something miraculous happens. Their energy changes entirely. The softness that once made the narcissist sneer becomes a magnetic field of quiet strength. They no longer need to prove anything, no longer need to show kindness. They simply need to be present. And that presence becomes the message. On the energetic level, they no longer attract manipulative souls because they no longer emit the frequency of, I will save you. They now broadcast the frequency of self-sovereignty, and only mature souls can resonate with it. Meanwhile, the narcissist, having lost their main supply, tries to restage the old play with someone new. But nothing can repeat as before. They begin to notice people around them responding, just like the empath once did toward the end, cool, indifferent, non-reactive. This is energetic karma. When a lesson isn't learned, it repeats until the soul faces itself. But the empath no longer cares. They've learned that true justice needs no human hand. The universe knows how to balance. As the empath is reborn, they pass through a phase many describe as golden silence. No more blame, no more hatred, only clarity. They do not need to retell the story to be believed, because they no longer live as a victim. They understand that what matters is not making others understand, but understanding themselves. Their sacred rage has now become creative energy, transmuted into words, art, work, or spiritual guidance for others walking a similar path. The empath now resembles someone who has walked through fire without being burned, radiating light from within. They have no need for revenge, because they have witnessed the universe administer perfect justice in the simplest way, with truth. And looking back, they no longer hate the narcissist. They see only a soul not yet evolved, still trapped in its own darkness. From a place of true compassion, they whisper, I release you, not because I hate you, but because I see you more clearly than you see yourself. This is soul rebirth, quiet, undramatic, yet so deep that all old energies must fall away. From the ashes of destruction, the empath rises, carrying the fire of sacred rage transmuted into the light of wisdom. They no longer need to battle darkness, because they now understand. Light does not need to win, it only needs to be present. And by its mere presence, every illusion collapses. Part 5. Sovereign Light. When the empath enters mastery of their energy, after the empath completes the journey of rebirth, a new door opens, not the door of suffering, but the door of sovereignty. Few speak of this stage because it lacks drama and emotional highs. It is a quiet so pure it feels almost otherworldly. Yet within this stillness, the empath discovers the true power they once sought outside, the power of conscious presence. If before they lived to react to words, emotions, and the needs of others, now they live to choose. Every energy entering their field is filtered through awareness. Does this nourish me or drain me? Is this love or bondage? They begin to understand that not everyone who comes close deserves entry. Not everyone who needs deserves to be saved. They learn to say no without justification, to walk away without proving they're right, to guard their peace without guilt. Jung once said, no one becomes an individual without daring to stand against the crowd. The empath now no longer fears being misunderstood or called cold. They understand that true kindness is not always saying yes, but daring to protect their energy from those who wield compassion as a weapon. They are no longer led by pity. They are guided by emotional wisdom, purified by awareness. At this stage, the empath realizes their energy is a frequency field. Everything they think, feel, and do broadcasts outward. Before, they transmitted the fear of abandonment and thus attracted souls who would exploit it. Now, they emit self-possession and peace and attract only those who resonate with maturity. They no longer seek connection as before. They become connection. Wherever they enter, the atmosphere changes. Others feel illuminated not by words, but by their field of presence. If the narcissist happens to see them now, two opposite reactions tend to arise: obsession and fear. Obsession because they cannot comprehend how someone once so weak could become so radiant. Fear because they know this soul has moved beyond their influence forever. They may try to return with subtler tactics, playing the changed person, acting awakened, talking about energy, the universe, healing, but the empath simply observes. One look, one heartbeat, one sensation in the body is enough to know. The energy is still not honest. They smile, but do not open the door. This is the embodiment of energetic sovereignty. The empath no longer relies on logic to guess. They use intuition refined through pain. They don't believe people, they sense them. And the wonder is that once they master their own energy, every relationship around them reorganizes itself. The false drift away. The genuine appear because energy does not lie. From a Jungian view, this is the stage where the empath achieves a union of light and shadow, no longer denying any part of themselves. They no longer fear anger, wounds, loneliness, or power. They have learned that all of it is part of being human. They don't need to be good to prove they are worthy of love. They only need to be true. And that truth purifies their energy, warm, incisive, and impenetrable. The empath no longer fights the narcissist. The battle ended long ago. They keep one principle. Non-reaction is the strongest reaction. They know that anyone trying to manipulate will expose themselves when no response is given. They have become a conscious mirror, reflecting not by unconscious compulsion but by choice. The authentic will see themselves. The false will recoil and retreat. From here on, the empath's life shifts to another plane, creation instead of survival. They begin to build what was once stolen: dreams, joy, art, purpose. They understand that healing is not forgetting, but learning to create something new from old ashes. The flame that once scorched them now becomes the light by which they guide others. With no resentment and no regret, the empath looks back with gratitude. Without the narcissist, they would never have discovered the depth of their inner strength. The narcissist thought they had destroyed a soul. In truth, they forged a spiritual warrior, one who can love without being consumed, forgive without being exploited, and keep silence that thunders like a storm. This is the final state of alchemy, transmuting darkness into gold. The empath no longer wears the label healer. They have become awakened. They do not need to prove or to save. They only need to be. And where they stand, darkness has no refuge. The fire that was once anger has become light. And in that light, the empath walks on without looking back, not out of pride, but because they have completed their mission, to turn pain into wisdom and wisdom into freedom. In the end, when every battle has passed, the empath no longer needs to look back for justice or an apology. They have understood that the universe always reveals the truth, not through revenge, but through revelation. What the narcissist tried to hide eventually exposes itself. And what the empath once endured becomes the light that proves they were never weak. Their silence itself becomes the declaration of the soul. I do not need to fight to prove my worth. I only need to exist as the light I truly am. The sacred rage, the very fire that once terrified them, is no longer the flame of destruction, but the torch of wisdom. They understand now that anger, when illuminated by consciousness, is no longer a storm, but the life force reclaiming its sacred right to exist. It is that energy which led them out of illusion, restored their soul, and allowed them to see the truth that many still fear to face. At this stage, the empath carries no bitterness. They know the narcissist was merely a messenger of destiny sent to force them to confront their own shadow. Through that encounter, they learned that love is not endurance, forgiveness is not forgetfulness, and kindness does not mean self-destruction. They have become clear-sighted, strong, and peaceful, not because they were never wounded, but because they walked through their wounds without losing their heart. And then, in the final stillness, they realized the deepest truth. They never needed to defeat the narcissist, for that person was never an opponent, only a lesson. The true victory was never over another, but over the self, over the ego, over fear, over the compulsion to save others just to feel worthy. The sacred rage, once the fire that burned away illusion, has now become the torch that lights the path for other souls. The empath walks forward not to avenge, but to guide. They are living proof that from the fire of betrayal can rise the light of freedom, from the pain of manipulation can bloom wisdom and compassion. And if you are reading this now, perhaps your soul is walking that same path. Remember, your anger is not a sign of sin, it is the signal of awakening. Do not fear the flame, let it purify you. Let it teach you how to love with boundaries, how to forgive with awareness, and how to walk away without regret. For in the end, the empath was never born to heal the world, they were born to awaken it. And when their sacred fire ignites, darkness has nowhere left to hide.